All right, welcome everybody to another episode of Tidal Flooding Talk, brought to you by the New Jersey Coastal Coalition in conjunction with our broadcast partners at Triax 57. This is our first episode of the new year, 2026. New year, new horizons. Dan, what's Dan looking forward to in 2026? Do we have anything on the to-do list for Dan?
Happy New Year. Well, it is a big milestone year, I guess you could say, if you believe in like the decadal birthdays, as I turned 50 this year. So
Wow.
kind of a big milestone.
Wow.
So it's just to the point where once you get up that age, hoping for healthiness and happiness. And I got a 4-year-old and 6-year-old at home, and kind of just looking to maintain, yeah, healthy and happy all the way in 2026. Nothing more specific than that. How about you?
Okay. I am actually looking to stretch more in
Okay.
2026. Yeah, I do work out, but I'm just not, I can't touch my toes. I can never touch my toes in my life. So I'm hoping to touch my toes by the time I'm done with
Yeah,
2026.
that's a good resolution. That's probably a unique one. I don't think that's on too many people's lists, hoping to
You
touch
know,
the toes
I,
in the
I
new
do,
year.
I would say like when I turned 30, I said there's going to be one thing I want to do each year and try to stick with it. So like I have like a couple years ago, this was more of like a Lent thing to give up for Lent, but it stuck. But I did like no sugar added for breakfast, and I've been sticking with that for like 4 years now. I'm doing don't last year's was don't eat when I'm full. Like don't keep eating after you're full. So I'm trying to just one step at a time. One
And you're
step.
among the minority that seems to adhere to their resolution, which is a great thing. Usually they fall by the wayside before the month of January is out. So kudos to you for sticking with whatever you set your mind to at
Well,
the start of the year.
thank you. I appreciate that. There's other ones I'm not telling you that I
Oh,
haven't done.
okay.
I'm
All
just
right.
giving you the highlights. The
We won't,
highlights.
we won't discuss the bad ones then.
Yeah. Well,
Okay.
that's maybe another episode. Anyway, where are we? Oh, this is Tidal Flooding Talk, right? Not New Year's resolution show. We are going to talk about a very interesting topic, and it's an elementary one, but it's super important to pretty much every episode we do here at Tidal Flooding Talk, which is how does sand move at the Jersey Shore? And today we have Dr. Lenore Tedesco from the Wetlands Institute. She is a staple of the South Jersey coastline. And we're super excited to have her on. Dr. Tedesco, thanks for coming on Tidal Flooding Talk here today.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me on, and Happy New Year's to everybody. And I'm not going to talk to you about my resolutions.
Are you sure? Okay, all right, that's fine. Maybe at the end, we do the one thing we can't stop talking about, tidal flooding or
Ah,
otherwise. So
all right.
if you want, we'll say. But anyway, I I got the idea to have you on because I was reading 7 Mile Times, and for people who aren't familiar, 7 Mile Times is a magazine for 7 Mile Island, which is Avalon and Stone Harbor in Cape May County, so the southern part of New Jersey. And she wrote an article about how sand moves throughout the year and the seasons and the weather and all that. And it was so interesting. I read it. I think I told you twice. It might have been 3 times. The third time might have been a glance over just to make sure. But I wanted to like really soak that all in because it's again so elementary to a lot of these discussions that come around tidal flooding talk. But we haven't really gotten to the base of it until now. So we'll ask you, just a number of questions about that. But first, I want to talk about your history with the Wetlands Institute. Tell us about the Wetlands Institute.
Yeah, the Wetlands Institute's a really fantastic place. We're a nonprofit. We're on the Jersey Shore. We were founded in 1969, so we're 55 plus years. I got to keep adding years to that. It was founded at a time really before there was environmental laws were in place here, and the founding director here recognized that sea level was important. He recognized that marshes were important, and he's actually in 1969 writing about the importance of marshes for coastal flooding and why we needed to protect them because of how much they do for coastal resilience. Here's a guy talking about coastal resilience in 1969 when we
Wow.
didn't start talking about that till Sandy kind of woke us up. So he protected almost 6,000 acres of marshes back here. So part of the beauty of southern Jersey and all these coastal marshes, they were actually protected by his work and efforts and the Institute. And then he founded the Institute to try to help people learn and understand more about them. I've been here now 13 years. I'm actually a sedimentologist. I study sediment, so I kind of get the sand grain thing that we were going to talk about. But I've spent the last 2 decades looking at trying to understand how coastal systems respond to sea level rise. And now it effectively dominates all that we do because it's such a prominent driver here. The marshes in many places along the East Coast and the Gulf Coast they're starting to be really in trouble with sea level rise. It's just rising faster than they can handle it. And while we want to focus on beaches today, the issue is the same for marshes and beaches. Beaches are eroding because sea level is rising, and marshes are drowning because sea level is rising. So a lot of the work we do here at the Institute now, we're working a lot with the Army Corps on marsh restoration. We're using dredge sediments to kind of elevate marshes, to bring them higher up, to try to help them remain resilient, to be healthy systems, to really to help protect us. They're part of our benefit to our communities. They're also, biodiverse and beautiful and recreationally important. So in a lot of ways, they really are very similar to our beaches. So while we focus a lot on beaches, this tidal flooding is really impacting both systems. They're connected systems.
Absolutely. You've been elevated to the role of executive director. How long have you been in that position now? I mean, I've been to the Wetlands Institute, such a great resource for South Jersey. And I can't believe that anybody was talking about resiliency, 5 decades ago, so ahead of his time.
Yeah.
And kind of, what's your role as executive director? How many different things you have going on at once?
I try to not think about all that. Yeah, we're a pretty big organization while we're a small organization. So I came here to be the executive director. I spent 21 years in academia before that, and so I'm an active research scientist working in wetlands and coastal systems. I'm responsible for fundraising. I'm responsible for programs and vision and all the things that we do, the finances. It's all kind of under my hat. We have 18 full-time staff here, which people don't really realize. We see about 31,000 people come through the doors here. So we have general admission visitor programs. We do have school kid programs. We have about 14,000 school kids come through here to learn about marshes, connect. We really just try to get people to connect to these ecosystems, to understand them, and then to steward them, whatever that means. So, everything we do is try to connect people to nature and provide them the means to understand it better. So I appreciate, being able to try to talk about some of these big issues to try to help people get a better grasp on, be aware of where they live, regardless of where that is, and what it means to be part of this. We're part of the ecosystem, right? What's our role in it? And understanding is a big piece of it, just to start there.
And excuse me, you earned your PhD at the University of Miami. What is your experience with not just the East Coast, but New Jersey?
Yeah, so I've been here now since for 13 years. I spent a lot of time in the back bays. I spent a lot of time on the beaches. I spent a lot of time really trying to understand. I have the benefit, my window looks out over these marshes, so I get to see them, every day, and it's kind of interesting. You tend to, I don't know, the windier and nastier the day, that's more often I'm out, because that's when a lot of things are happening, right? It's when these systems are energetic that they're changing and moving. So I get to see them day in and day out. And I feel connected to them, and I get a sense of how they're changing. And I'm a geologist, so I think about long term, right? Time is a different thing to a geologist. And what strikes me is the rate of change that we're seeing right now is so fast compared to the way we think about geologic time. And even the way our barrier islands formed or these marshes formed on such longer time frames, but the changes that we're seeing now are happening so fast. And I think that's a big part of the challenge that we'll dive into some more. So I guess I just, my experience is up and down the coast. It's working with different folks in different places on different marsh projects, restoration projects. And of course, I'm just a beach walker at the end of the day. I'm a beach walker.
That's good too. That's probably a bonus.
Yep.
All right, we're going to take our first break here. We'll come back on the other side on Tidal Flooding Talk.
Welcome back to this week's Tidal Flooding Talk, along with my co-host Joe Martucci. I'm Dan Skeldon, talking with Dr. Lenore Tedesco, Executive Director of the Wetlands Institute. And, when this topic first came up, I was talking with my fellow meteorologist here in the background, and he said, "Hey, we're going to be talking about how sand moves today," and didn't know what type of reaction I'd get from him. And he's like, "Oh my God, that sounds so interesting. Is that the reason like the Wildwood beaches are bigger?" Because he vacations down the Jersey Shore all the time. And I mean, he's a meteorologist, he's a weather weenie like Joe and I, but he was actually intrigued by it. So as Joe and I are as well. So let's kind of dive into that, and I'm going to dig up that 7 Mile Times article too. Because if Joe reads anything 3 times, it's going to be interesting. But let's kind of dive into it. And how does sand move? Let's start by season along the Jersey Shore.
Yeah, so really interesting. So beaches are smart. I'm going to just, start there. And effectively, a beach is at sea level, right? So you think about that. And sea level is a funny thing. It's like, what's sea level? Well, if I'm in the mountain, sea level is 0, right? And that's easy to understand. But you're at the beach, where's 0, right? So it moves up and down the beach based on the tides.
Yep.
So the sand moves up and down the beach associated with waves that are pushing the sand up and down the beach. But at the same time, that changes dramatically seasonally as well as position along the beach. So how does sand move on the beach? Every time a wave breaks and that little swash washes up the beach, it actually rolls the sand up the beach. And then the wave breaks and slides back down and it moves back down. But the really cool thing, and you've all seen this, you've all experienced it, if you're standing on the beach and you watch the waves don't break straight onto the beach, right? They start at one end and they break down the beach.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what's happening is water's washing up onto the beach, and in most of the coast of New Jersey and most of the east coast of the US, the waves are breaking from north to south. And it's just the way the offshore works, and the waves come in and they break down. And you also realize that the water then sloshes up the beach and back down to the beach from north to south. And you know this because when you get in the water and you're playing in the water, you realize, where are you? Your towels.
Yeah.
The beach, right?
Right.
So you're being moved. So it's like a river of sand. There's a river of water, and that water is moving the sand from north to south along essentially the entire east coast of the US. There's a couple places it's doing something a little different, but for the most part, it's going north to south, and it's taking the sand grains north to south.
But if I can just interject, right, I'm guessing that there's some exceptions, right? Like sometimes you get pulled north, right, on the beach. Is that separate of what you're saying, or is that all in the same thing?
It's sort of in the same thing. So if you get a wind event that's bringing waves in from a different direction, but kind of the most of the time, prevailing conditions, sand is moving to the south. Again, there's some little bit of seasonal changes, but the grand part of this is it's moving north to south. And where did that sand came from? Sand ultimately came from eroding mountains, coming down rivers, got to the coast. But I can actually track sand grains in New Jersey that ultimately came from basically Maine. And so everything is moving south.
Okay.
So, and then you take on each barrier island, then the sand is moving south between the tidal inlets.
Okay? Yeah.
So the barrier islands, and the interesting thing is the width of the barrier island is based on how much tide there is. So the same amount of water has to go into and out of the back bays in the same tidal cycle. So there's 6 hours, 25 minutes for, most of the tides. So the barrier islands are chopped up based on how much water needs to go through. So if you got on this coast, on New Jersey, we're kind of in the mid-tide ranges. The barrier island widths are almost roughly the same, 5, 6, 7 miles. If I have much higher tidal ranges, the barrier islands get shorter and shorter because I need more spaces. And if I have much lower tidal range, they get longer.
Okay. So, but when you say 5, 6, 7 miles, are you talking about the length north to south of the okay. Yeah.
Yeah. So 7 Mile Island, 5 Mile Island, right? And some of them carry the names. But if I go further north up to Long Beach Island, way longer, right?
Yeah.
So I can tell you right now, the tidal range is way lower. I don't need any tidal inlets to get in and out in the same amount of time.
Interesting. So I'm wondering now, I'm kind of thinking off the top of my head, like when you look at flood gauges, right? The one in Barnegat Light is always lower than other ones. Is that what you're saying? Is that
that's the base? That's right. That's the base amount of water that has to come in and out.
Did you know that?
No, I've been tidal flooding forecasting like for
Yeah, I didn't
decades
know
now,
that
and
either.
never realized that. That's really cool.
Wow. That's really cool. I'm gonna have to look at this later. I'm glad we had you on.
Yeah.
So, okay, what about, let me ask you this though. What about like where Seabright is or Monmouth Beach? Because that's more of a peninsula, right? Than a true island. Does that mean anything?
It it's going to tell you how much how where water's cutting through the systems overall. But just to jump back to the sand
Yeah,
question.
yeah, yeah,
So
sure,
the
sure.
sand on each barrier island is moving from the north end of its island to the south end, right? And then you get
Right.
to the tidal inlet, and then most of the sand either pushes in or out, right? But so there's like these little breaks. But so when you think about it, pretty much every barrier island is eroding at the north end
Yeah, that
and
makes
growing at the
sense.
south end. And the reason for that is think of it as a giant conveyor belt. It's a conveyor belt with a zigzag pattern. So the sand
Okay.
goes up the beach and then down the beach to the south, up the beach, down the beach to the south, up the beach, down the beach to the south. It's a giant river of sand moving south. And then the only question comes in is what happens? Can I go past the tidal inlet? And the answer is yes. You build these big shoals and then it jumps to the next one.
Wow. Okay.
Okay.
So with the zigzag, right? So is that's per island? No, right? That's not the
Per
whole
island.
Jersey Shore. Right. Okay.
No.
And anywhere. Okay. So what about like I think if you're in New Jersey, the question maybe on people's mind is, well, what about Wildwood? Because the beach is so wide there in the city of Wildwood. We know the north end of Wildwood's a different story. So
You're
like
gonna hate my answer.
what's the rub on Wildwood? Why is it so long?
But it's wide. But part of the reason it's wide is because there's not a street. Look at where the beach is super wide.
Yeah.
The street ends. So
So it's a function of human.
they let it be more wide by not developing right out. I mean, it's a wider beach in general, but the reason it's super wide is because there's no street there. I mean, that sounds weird, but I looked at it one day and I'm like, wait a minute. So and the reality is the big issue we have with beaches, so the sand's moving back and forth, it's moving down, and then the north ends are always erosional, the south ends are growing. So if I take 7 Mile Island, it's really great because I love Avalon's, cooler by a mile. Well,
It is.
sure. But the fact is, the north end of Avalon is eroding, the south end of Stone Harbor is growing. They're probably pretty close to the same now.
Right. Yeah, I
Yeah,
guess that'd be true.
that's
I mean,
amazing. Oh, I'm
yeah.
sorry, Joe. Go ahead.
No, no, go ahead, Dan.
Oh no, because my familiarity, I lived in Ocean City forever, and I'm just so aware with like Strathmere eroding at the north end of that island and the north end of Ocean City, like North Wildwood, the erosion problems, but the beaches are bigger down south. It kind of all makes sense. I just have one quick follow-up question. You may or may not know the answer. Is that north to south sand migration that's common up and down most of the East Coast? Is that unique to the East Coast, or let's just say the Pacific Ocean or other northern hemisphere coastlines? Is north to south hemisphere wide, or does every coastline have its own kind of pattern?
I'm not sure if I'm going to say it's going to be on a big scale, and I bet it's related to the ocean gyres, the way the systems are flowing. So it's definitely it's the whole east coast of the U.S. for sure.
Okay.
Yeah, and then you get these breaks where you have sediment coming in rivers. You kind of change some of that. You get some other eddy
Right.
patterns and things like that. But it's a really common pattern here, and it's important here, and that's literally why all the north end of the barrier islands are eroding. The south end is accreting, and then we are growing south, and then you get the interesting component of this pattern gets disrupted in storms, right? Storms kind of throw everything into turmoil.
Yeah.
And that's the big driver now in terms of what's really happening on our coast is the frequency and intensity of storms is so much it's just resetting systems.
Sure. And we're going to talk more about that in our next segment here. We'll take another break and we'll be back with you on Tidal Flooding Talk. Thanks to the New Jersey Coastal Coalition, your flood insurance bills are lower and your streets safer from the reality of flooding. Since beginning in 2013, we build more resilient shoreline communities. Our member towns develop and share in best practices that anticipate future concerns and create flooding solutions. From our town-specific free web app for flooding information to our weekly Tidal Flooding Talk show, we focus on flooding 24/7. Visit www.njcoastalcoalition.com for more. If you live at the coast, tidal flooding or sunny day flooding is increasing due to rising seas and king tides. Even without rain, streets can flood, blocking roads and damaging property. So be prepared. Check your flood risk on the FEMA's Flood Map Center or on the NOAA Tides website. Get flood insurance. See if you're eligible for a discount through the National Flood Insurance Program. Sign up for local alerts and monitor tidal predictions and elevate valuables. And of course, use sandbags if you need to. Stay informed, stay safe. Visit ready.gov for more tips. All right, so we're continuing this very interesting conversation about sand and how it moves. And my question for you here is, and you can talk about New Jersey or the East Coast or whatever you feel comfortable with, what have we as humans done to this zigzagging motion of sand moving just with the buildup on the beaches that we have?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So you remember I started with beaches are really smart, right? They know where zero is.
Yes.
Well, as they move, right? Because they always want zero to be at the same place on the beach, kind of just above, just below where you put your towel kind of thing on that slopey part of the beach. That's kind of where zero is. So we've decided as people that the beach is going to stay where it is, right? We sold land behind it. We put streets in. We said, beach, you're here. Well, the problem is sea level's rising. So as sea level rises, the beach says, I'm going to move to higher ground, so my zero stays where it's supposed to be. So what did we do? We said, no, you're not. Yeah. So we're holding the beaches in the same place. Sea level's rising. So what happens is the beach is, quote, eroding. So it's resetting itself. The steeper part of the beach is where that zero is, where you wanted to put your towels is now narrower. The dunes are thinner because the whole beach is trying to move. So we've said, well, we'll fix that. We'll put sand on the beach. So putting sand on the beach, we're trying to raise the elevation of the beach so that zero's back to where we said it's supposed to be.
Okay.
It works.
Right. It works. Okay.
Until the next storm.
Right.
Or if we don't replenish the beaches anymore.
Or if you don't replenish the beach.
Right.
That's
right.
It.
So, like you said, beaches are smart, right? And, as we continue to see rising, we've seen rising sea levels, like you said, we know that. We know the storms are impacting. Are we fighting a losing battle, or is there a real solution to this? Is there a permanent solution we can do to enjoy the beach as we do now?
So I'm not going to say, are we fighting a losing battle? I'm not going to say yes, but I am going to say we're fighting a never-ending battle.
Okay.
It's never going to change because we're not going to abandon our shorelines and our cities and allow things to move, right? We're just not going to do that. We can't do that. I'm not asking that we do that. I don't, that's off the table kind of thing, right? So here we are. But the reality is, so in the last basically 100 years, sea level's risen 1.4 feet down here in this part of New Jersey.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's a big deal, right? Because if I think about the overall beach profile, they're pretty flat, right? In terms of the way you think about them. So the whole beach wants to be somewhere else. I'm like, no, you're here. So every time we put sand on the beach, right? So the Army Corps has these 50-year projects. They've studied it. They understand it. They designed this beach template to be something that, and they're smart, right? They're good designs. The problem is they're static and anchored 20, 30 years ago.
Right.
Yep.
So they set an elevation, they set a dune height, and they put the sand on the beach. And the reality is that sand is it's high relative to that zero, but the profile, and as soon as we get energy, right? Beaches change during energy, right? There's people love to go to the beach after a storm and see what happened, right? So that sand reprofiles. And in a storm, the beach tries to protect itself and it creates what's called a storm ramp. It's this broad, flat, if you go out after a storm, right? The beach itself, you might see a dune scarp, but the beach is just perfectly flat. It takes its sand and it puts it offshore to try to break up the wave energy that's coming in. So the beach puts the sand offshore. As it goes offshore, remember, it's also going
south.
Probably south.
Yeah.
Right. So it's moving out of the system. If you have an uninterrupted system, there's maybe some sand coming down from the north, so you're kind of okay, right? But the frequency of storm impact is way more than we've expected. So while the beach fills that are now crazy expensive are designed to be on a 3-4 year rotation, there are portions of the beach that are eroding way faster than that. So the frequency and intensity of storms is increasing outside of the design plans for when we were going to do nourishment. And then we start needing more and more sand to nourish more and more because the beach thinks it should be somewhere else. We're starting to run out of sand in the sand sources.
Yeah.
Yep.
We're in this loop.
Yeah, the
right?
beaches are smart. The Army Corps of Engineers and people are smart, but like you said, it's a never-ending battle. Despite all this intelligence from the natural state of the beaches and mankind,
Yep.
you still have sea level rise, you have storms, and you just have all the elements working against you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's what we're seeing, right? So, and I think the other important part of this is the Army Corps' design templates, they're designed to protect people and property. They're not designed to have a wide place to put your towel.
Yeah.
Right. But so there's an expectation challenge here, I think, as well. Because when people go to the beach and you see that big dune scarp after a big storm, you should be clapping. That's exactly what was supposed to happen. That's a sacrificial sand thing. All the time the waves were eating that dune, they weren't eating your house.
Right.
Yep.
Right. So that's the plan. So people see that as a failure. Oh my God, the beach is eroded. Oh my God, the dune protected our communities.
Right.
That was the plan.
Yeah.
So, and then people are upset that the beach isn't wide enough because that's where they tell. The money that's being put into, a huge amount of money, is to protect our coastal communities with sand replenishment. So there's a couple of things here. People really understood and appreciated that, they would be okay with it more. But so how do you line up the recreational needs with the protection needs? And how do you think about this increasing frequency? And I think somewhere along here, I don't know how you get it, but when the first fill started coming in the early, in the late 80s, 90s, when all these plans started coming in, the cost of doing a beach fill was a lot more manageable.
Yeah.
I just don't know if needs to be more competition. There's just not that many dredging companies out there. So the costs are skyrocketing. The frequency is increasing. So all these things kind of come together to this, what do we do scenario that we're in.
Yeah. That good food for thought there. And you're not the only person who's told me that the cost of beach replenishments have gone up, by a lot more than you would expect. And that plays a role into everything here, especially as we go into 26. We know that there's questions about how we're going to get funded for beaches. And, my one thing I can't stop thinking about as we transition to the end is, what are we going to do with the ability to refill these beaches that have been, like you said, eroded, which is a good thing, but we still need to fill them at some point, and we need to make sure we have the money to do that. And I know we have, partners in Congress and elsewhere that are looking into this, and we'll hope that for 2026, my Tidal Flooding Talk New Year's wish is that we get this federal funding, or the funding needed to give these towns the access to additional sand in these beach fills. Dan, go ahead.
I think it's the first time one thing I can't stop talking about is related to something a guest said, and I think it's fascinating. And all the years of tidal flooding forecast, I did not know the length of the island was kind of proportional to the variety or the variability of the tide height. And I'm still just trying to say, how come I didn't know this? I think that's fascinating, and I'm gonna talk about that for a while. So thank you for that very interesting tidbit of knowledge.
Yeah, it's beaches are, look, they're fantastic. They're wonderful. They're dynamic. That's the thing. And that's part of what we love about them, right? They have their own rhythm and dynamism. And we're trying to not have them be dynamic. And that's just not going to work. So then the question is, how do we, adjust to that allowance? But, you want some good news. I mean, I talk to people down here and they talk about the beaches when there was no beach, right? There was a rocky edge. The bulkhead was there. You had to take steps down to the beach. So in that regard, the renourishment has worked because over time, right, we built wider beaches and they're much higher elevation than they ever would have been. So, it did work. I think we just still want much wider beaches, and maybe part of that is you got to assume we're not going to have such a giant wide beach, and just expect a little something a little different. I think there's an alignment with expectations here too that could be helpful.
Yeah.
Okay, good to know. Great. Well, tell us where people can follow more with the Wetlands Institute.
Yeah, you jump on wetlandsinstitute.org. We've got a lot of social media posts out there. Come visit. It's a cool place, and you can go to the beach from here, and you can see the marshes as well.
That's true. Awesome. Well, Dr. Tedesco, thank you so much for the time. We appreciate you coming on Tidal Flooding Talk. Super interesting for Dan and I. And I hope everyone else here enjoyed it also. So for Dan Skeldon, I'm Joe Martucci. Till next Tuesday, everybody. Thanks for listening to Tidal Flooding Talk.